Chapter 4. The Discovery. Will closed his eyes and waited. He was stuck. He was in a position right now where he could do nothing but wait for the one behind him to make his move. There was not a stir, not a breath, not the crack of a twig. The hush over the trees was total, and in that the sound was deafening. Will thought the best thing he could do was finish what he was doing and behave like he didn't know of the presence an arm's length from his back. He dared not turn around or make a start. He dared not speak a word. He quietly finished and began refastening the pin of his leather belt, to which was attached in his own handmade pouch a knife of practical means and razor sharpness. An outdoorsman, a frontiersman, such as Will, was not without the tools of his trade. William had no sooner clipped the buckle than he immediately swung around in one wide motion, grasping the knife handle and sliding the hardened white streak of a blade from its sheath to point directly behind him at waist height. Had Nunes been standing there, William surely would have caught him off guard, securing an opening of escape. He was not so lucky. As quickly as it had been released to the light, the knife was hit by something heavier and sent to the leaves at their feet. Will now stood empty-handed and out of tricks, face to face with an immense, hairy man, grinning from ear to ear. The foul-looking man let out a laugh that shook poor Will to his shoes. "You won't be needing that," said the man. "Not now." His powerful blue eyes, wild and white above the pupils, seemed lit with a satisfying madness. His mouth was filled with yellow, jagged teeth, surrounded by the most woolly black hair and mange that covered all of his neck and face below the cheeks, allowing only a part-time opening for his mouth. The burst of hair on top seemed to leap out of his skull and hang there above his squarish eyebrows, like the lawn of a house where one no longer lives. He wore an odd mixture of buckskin, fur, and men's apparel, as though his outfit had been donated through both the benevolence of nature and that of a clothesline. He was not tall for a man, but twice as thick, and apparently twice as fast. Again he spoke. "You're a long way from home, my boy." He paused to stare. "And so I'll ask you, what might you be doing in my home?" Then again appeared the unsettling grin and those wide, white, glowing eyes. Will was speechless, and that took a lot. In fact, he'd never felt so disarmed before, so he wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation of this woolly mammoth before him. The man's eyes narrowed when he added, in the most frighteningly soft tone, "And I suggest, boy, you don't even think of reaching for that shot of yours." Then there formed a strange sculpted stillness between the two, where neither moved nor spoke, but in that silence there was nonetheless a complete exchange of comprehension. Standing there, Will simply realized there wasn't a thing he could do. This beast of a man had bested him, and it was really quite ironic in a way. Will had always thought himself a natural-born, outdoorsy sort of man, but it would seem he was still somewhat sapling-greenish. So, with nothing more to be done, Will, too, began to grin, first with his mouth, then with his whole face. Unexpectedly, the man followed suit. When Will let out a burst of laughter, The stranger evoked his belly once again, and both men roared toe to toe under the tall trees beneath the silvery slipping sky. The sun was waning, and the woods were no place to be unsecured or unprovisioned after dusk. The man looked up through the overhang of branches, then back to Will. He mumbled something under his breath about night creatures soon to be out. Then his expression changed, and he appeared almost resigned, issuing a deep sigh. The stranger raised his gnarled branch of a walking stick and pressed the tip to Will's shoulder, hastening him aside. With the stick politely but firmly pinning the boy, the hairy man, without a word, lifted Will's rifle from its resting place. He slung it across his own shoulder, though somewhat tight a fit, and motioned for Will to pick up his knife. "Hand it to me, boy, head first," said he, which Will did promptly. The man tucked it under his twisted cord of a belt, then grinned once more and said, "Nothing personal, son. I just don't trust people. I used to live with them." He lifted the stick and motioned for Will to walk ahead in the direction he had come. "But, sir," said Will, "I didn't mean to enter your forest. I've got to get home." The man was not particularly moved. "What you've got to do, son, is start walking. I'll show you where." He added, "I don't expect to hurt you if you're not stupid." When the oak of a man inhaled, his chest literally expanded to twice its size. "I don't think you look like the stupid type, are you?" This was one of those times, as the books of old had advised, was best to refrain from speaking. Will silently nodded, "No," in agreement. The man, therefore, nodded his head for Will to move, which is what he did. They walked without a word, Will ahead, and the stranger behind, within striking distance. When Will would inadvertently veer from the intended course, the man would be heard to tap a tree to the right or left, issuing his desired direction. This was an effective enough reminder of the man's swiftness with that stick to elicit an acquiescent response. After what Will reckoned was a mile in the bush, the man spoke 3 words. "To the stream." So, along the stream they walked, in single file, in the opposite direction to that which Will had hoped. The land was rising on their left, inclining toward the bluffs. The sun had withdrawn through the clouds, and the moon shone on the sparkling stream, hastening away from them. In the distance, Will could almost see a point of flickered light part way up the craggy jut of earth. Just then he felt another tap on his shoulder. The stick now pointed to the cliff. "Up there," the man said. They continued. In his mind, William would ask himself many questions. What would Daniel Boone have done? For that matter, what would Uncle Des have done? Then the answer returned. They'd wait. They'd see the cards this man was to deal. They'd see the lay of the land and the perimeters of the situation. Then they'd make their play. So, without a struggle or hint of being stupid, Will let the man lead him to an opening in the rocks, to a cover from where the flickered light originated, to his den. Upward they climbed over rock and range till they reached a natural opening in the landscape. A trickle of water spilled here over the stony face, and catching it was a hollowed-out log fashioned into a trough. What overfilled simply continued its journey down the bluff to join the stream. As they approached the opening in the cliff face, the stick quickly nudged Will inside. From behind he could hear the grinning words, "Sorry, son, I can't have you hollering for help." I values my privacy." He continued, "Now I can shield that blasted fire. That was for your sake." The man then walked past Will, and almost in slow motion, deliberately turned his head and directed a pointed look into the boy's eyes, saying, "I knew you'd be coming." Will felt a shiver. This man was a step ahead of him, even from behind. William knew not what the man meant, nor frankly what to do, but he determined to keep a cool head and observe. He realized he could simply not anticipate what to expect, and certainly not what dreadful fate might meet him in that cave. And most of all, he was not prepared for the shock to come. As they entered, Will's eyes needed adjusting. Strangely, the interior of the cave was more lit than the night sky. They walked down a slight grade to the womb of the cavern, where a fire was kept burning, the smoke of which met the ceiling and ambled up a narrow passage, where it presumably reached another opening to the world. The odd thing about this lair was that there was actually furniture arranged inside. There was a chair and table off to one corner, a sort of cupboard set up nearby, and a large steamer trunk unevenly set against the curved far right wall. Another chair, this one fashioned from large slabs of rock, sat empty near the fire. From what Will could see, sticking out from both ends behind the stone, was a sort of mattress covered with furs. All in all, it looked quite comfortable in there, and Will secretly began to wish he could live in a place of his own like this. The man made no motion toward Will, but instead mutely grinned, strode over to the chair, and gently nudged the mattress with his foot. "I believe this is yours," he said. There was a pause, then movement. Fingers suddenly curled over and slapped onto the top of the stone chair. Then, without warning, up popped alive the head of one Geoffrey Asher. The boy's eyes opened wide as Sunday saucers, and Will immediately ran toward Jeff, grasped him by the shoulders, and practically shook him apart to verify the sight. He was real indeed. Then the two clasped hands as brothers newly returned from a far country. The man's burst of laughter echoed from wall to wall and fairly startled the flame to a dancing frenzy. As if remembering something, the man ran to the mouth of the cave, yanked a tarp from the floor, and hung it on metal stakes that had been driven into the walls. The cover fit instinctively around the edges, effectively sealing the three of them inside. "Now we're dark again," he muttered. Will had found his friend, but at that moment a question draped across his thoughts. "Are the two of us now doomed in here?" "No," he concluded to himself. "They'd both be hanging on the walls like beef right now if this wild man wanted it so. There must be something else on his mind." He looked at the man, as if sizing him up, and decided to find out. The caveman approached them. Closer he came, within inches, but, strangely, as if the boys were not there, just kept on walking. At the far left corner of the jagged room, if one could call it a room, just past the cupboard, stretched another passageway, this one quite narrow. He slipped through the slit in the wall. William, wide-eyed, kept a close watch on the man's doing, and in turn, Jeff watched William. Moments later, the stranger appeared again, this time with a large cut of meat in one paw of a hand and a slicer of a knife in the other. He slapped the meat onto the table and, without hesitation, slit a portion, which he then cut in halves. With 3 chunks in hand, he returned to the fire opposite the boys. From the wall he dragged a swath of fur with his foot, and with surprising grace descended onto it in cross-legged Indian fashion. He hunkered down to the business of his meal. Throughout this display, his eyes remained fixed on William. When the first bite was nearly consumed, he opened and said, "You'll be hungry," tossing the 2 severed chunks to Will. The man nodded his head at Geoffrey as if to say, "Give one to him," which Will had determined to do anyway. The grinning man continued with his meal in earnest. There appeared to be no imminent danger, reasoned Will, and with that concern assuaged for the moment, he proceeded to ask a head full of questions to Geoffrey, who too seemed to carelessly entertain the parcel of meat. "Where were you? What happened? How did you get here? Who is this man?" These were among the first of many questions chasing the chewing Geoffrey, who could scarcely answer among bites and further queries. He swallowed and said, "First of all, William, I'm so glad you're here. I'm not in danger. We're not. It's okay. He helped me." Through the fire were heard chuckles and chews and the words, "No, I'm not dangerous, not at all." Perhaps the intake of food prevented another shattering laugh that might emerge from the cavern of his belly. Even without looking, they could feel his grin over there. At last, Will joined in the most welcomed meal. As primitive as it was sustenance. He was content for the moment that they were reasonably safe and no foul play was afoot. The night had taken root, and there was no wisdom in heading out till daybreak. Geoffrey began his cursory explanation with, "There's so much I need to tell you. I found out some things, but you'll have to help me get back home. I can't walk very well." Will's eyes flashed across the flames toward the stranger. Geoffrey quickly added, "No, listen, he saved me. I had fallen down that steep edge where the land drops off, over by—" He paused, "just past Bill Noon's cabin." He took another bite of his salty, smoky supper, recounted the details of his fall, and how this mountain man had come upon him. Aside from bruises and scrapes, Geoffrey had definitely broken his right leg below the knee. After a time, one question remained. What was he doing there in the forest in the first place? Geoffrey continued, "It's difficult to explain, but I was doing some research, and part of that led me, finally, to the cabin. I had to check out something for myself, but I didn't get too far. Actually, I didn't even get inside. When Noons heard my footsteps out there, he burst through the front door with his gun pointed everywhere, and it was all I could do to make it to the covering of the woods. But I lost my way and, discovered this valley. I kind of lost my footing on the terrain and slid nearly to the bottom. That's where I hit my leg on a swine of a rock, and I guess you can see the result. There I was, flat on my back in the dirt for what seemed like forever. I couldn't get up, and I sure couldn't yell for help. I could barely move, and I thought for sure I was a goner. If Bill Noons didn't find me, some beast would. When this mountain man came along, I thought some beast had. I was wrong. He helped me, Will. He carried me up the face of this cliff and here to this place. I guess he must have... Well, of course he did. He tied this stick brace around my leg. I don't know. I've been slipping in and out of consciousness for days. He brought me food and let me stay here by the fire. He said something would be done and that he was waiting for someone to arrive. He seems to have a feel for natural things, and he told me that He just sort of listens to what the forest tells him. Will listened intently to his friend's words. Through the glow, he could see the outline of the man's distorted shadow dancing on the caved wall. Their host poked at the flames and set a fresh log atop it to last the night. Will couldn't quite figure out why the stranger had come to their aid, or for that matter, where he had come from. Tonight, all that mattered was that in this man's home, they were safe. "Thank you, sir," said Will. "I just want to thank you for your kindness, sir."
"Sir?" the man chuckled. "That's one I haven't heard before," he grunted. "Folks has given me plenty of names, but sure as sin, sir isn't one of them."
The flames grinned back, illuminating his teeth in an unearthly way. At last, Will asked the question. "Who are you? How did you come to live here? What's your name?" The man slowly inhaled and replied,
"You boys help yourself to those skins over there. They's plenty. I've trapped just about enough for everyone."
He pointed at Will.
"You keep warm, son. You've got work tomorrow."
Will didn't know what he meant by that, but thought it best not to ask right then. He suspected cards would be played face up in the daylight. He'd wait. They each made themselves a place of rest around the comforting hiss and crackle of the log. Jeff on the cot, and the two frontiersmen on opposite sides of the hearth. A gentle wind stirred the tarp covering the mouth of the cave, there above the forest floor. Crickets and creatures of night hinted of their presence below. Trying to sleep was like trying to walk a cat on a leash. No amount of trying could force what would come or defer of its own inclination. Some things just whisper and move without man's accord. So Will untried his best to rest. He found it near impossible to keep still that night when his mind was still running through the day. Finally, the man spoke through the flickered darkness.
"My name is just like yours, son. It's William, or Billy."
Will's eyes opened as he lay there.
At least that's what he called me. William Clayton."
After a pause, the man exhaled and continued in a quieter tone, underlain with something secretly unpleasant.
"I was named after my father, Bill Nunes."
The tarp shuddered in the night chill. Nothing more was spoken.